Welcome everybody. It's good to have another meeting on another beautiful day, and good to see you all. Can I remind you of the normal rules of Zoom? I'm sure you're all very used to them by now, but it's if you could please put your microphones on mute if you're not speaking. Councillor Chambers, Rodney Chambers, did ask for those who weren't speaking particularly, if you could maybe turn your video off as well, just to help with bandwidth. If we could also, if you could raise your hands physically or virtually if you want to speak, and I will try to keep an eye on both the panelists and also on the looking at you. So those of you who are members of the board, voting members of the board, if you could keep your videos on. It's only the other people who I'm asking to turn your videos off so that I can see you. When we go to vote to agree on something, if you could please raise your hands. Rhiannon's asked for that to be done actually physically, so we can count it in the easiest possible way, and then we can see that you put your hand down to go to the next vote. And if I could remind you please that members of the public are able to listen in, and as our press, and officers are also listening in, you'll see on the list of attendees. So we are trying today a slightly new format for the meeting in order to ensure that we are able to get through things as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. So steers aren't going to be presenting on each matter, but officers will give a kind of high-level introduction to the items on the assumption that you have been able to read all your papers and obviously understood those papers, but please feel free to ask questions of officers after their presentations as well. And do let us know after this meeting whether you feel that this new format is working for you and delivers all that we need it to do. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to item 2, which is the minutes of the last meeting on the 3rd of July 2020. Are there any comments on those minutes? No. And are you happy to agree those minutes as a true record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Sorry,
Okay.
Sarah, could I just to let everybody know that the meeting is being recorded, so we just have to let people know that for GDPR purposes. So the meeting is being recorded and it will be published on the website, so you can watch again if you want. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Okay, so everybody's happy with those as a true record. Thank you. We'll move on now to item 3, which is declarations of interest. So please, apropos the members' code of conduct, please can you declare any interest? Simon?
Yeah, obviously with item number 14 with the skills, but I don't think it determines me to have to leave the room or not comment, but I think it's just worth noting in case there's any conflict later on down the road.
Or have we lost Sarah?
Every time I speak, Sarah,
I think, yeah. It's something to do with you, I think.
Nothing to do with me, yeah.
Okay, we'll wait for a couple of seconds. We will note your, so that this is regarding the SELEP Revenue Skills Fund. We'll note your interest there. I don't think we need you to withhold your vote on that one, do we, Charlotte?
Sorry, I'm not quite familiar. Is it a pecuniary interest that you have in that?
I don't suspect I'm going to be bidding for that, so no.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Suzanne, I didn't answer your question, did I? No, I think it's fine. Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. We will just hear Sarah comes back now.
I'm sorry, I got kicked out. I'm back again.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'm hoping this is not going to happen through the rest of this meeting, but I really apologise. So does someone want to tell me where we got up to?
So we just confirmed with Charlotte from legal that Simon doesn't need to preclude himself from the item that he declared an interest on. So
Thank you.
we have we've resolved that and ready to move to the next item, I think.
Okay, thank you. Public questions, we have not received any, is that right, Rhiannon?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move swiftly on then to item 5, which is the local fund capital programme, local growth fund capital programme update. I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon in just a moment, but just to celebrate for a moment the fact that we have had the final third of LGF has been confirmed, so that's very good news. We have made a commitment to government that the money would be spent by the end of the financial year, and we need to have confidence that all of these projects that we're looking at will can definitely proceed. Obviously, we're looking at capital swaps for some of these, but we do need reassurance as a board that they are going to be able to be delivered. So with that context, I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, in today's update, a very brief update. So following the meeting in July, we had various projects that were received funding award subject to that final third of funding being confirmed from government. So that's good news. Those projects, where there are no other conditions on those funding decisions, they can now proceed. So there's quite a number of projects can now progress. So that's really good news. We are reporting quite a lot of spend beyond the growth deal period now. So about £58 million. So a substantial amount of spend going beyond this financial year. So we are encouraging project managers to accelerate things where they possibly can during this year. We will be taking an update report to Strategic Board next month, just to highlight those projects that are high risk. In today's pack as well, there's also information around those high risk projects. We're really asking board members to focus on those projects over the next few meetings, particularly in November, when we really need confirmation that projects can either proceed, or that gives us a chance to reallocate that funding and bring something new forward so we can award that funding before the end of the financial year. So in the report, there are a number of high-risk projects listed. Two that I particularly want to bring to your attention are the Exeter Bridge project in East Sussex. So that was awarded £2.1 million at the last board meeting. That funding was subject to local funding contributions being confirmed. Unfortunately, those funding contributions haven't been made available, and no alternative funding route has been identified to deliver the project. So there's currently about a £1.4 million gap, and there's no kind of options to mitigate that risk. So the recommendation in the report is that funding comes back into the pot and is reallocated to the next projects on the LGF pipeline. The other high-risk report high-risk project I want to bring to your attention is the M11 Junction 8 project in Essex. And this project, it's already spent £2.2 million. It's a much more advanced stage in the Exeter Bridge project. There are other contributions that have already been made towards the project. It went out to tender, and as part of those tender costs, it actually came back much higher than expected. So the tender cost was higher. There's also uncertainty around some of the match contributions that were due to be made available. So in total, we're looking at a potential funding gap of up to about £7 million on this project. At this point, I think Essex County Council are exploring options to bridge that funding gap. And the proposal here is just to bring back a report to the November Accountability Board meeting with a further update around how those issues can be mitigated. In the meantime, though, we are suggesting that the board place the project on hold. So although £2.2 million has been spent, the remaining LGF contribution, that will not be able to draw down until there's mitigation in place to either be able to proceed with the project or to look at options for that funding to be reallocated. So I'm going to stop there. If there are any questions on the report, happy to take them.
Thank you. Sorry, I've had to move. So yeah, please, Ron, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. Rhiannon, you say that the money, the final third, and it has to be spent by the end of the financial year, yet we're forecasting an underspend of 58.1. We know COVID had a problem with the shutdown. Have we got any delaying situation with that? Can we sort of go a bit further past the end of March?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, the strategic board itself actually agreed last March, before we had any review by governments, that actually we could extend the growth deal period to 30th September 2021. So there is already a 6-month extension that's been agreed by the strategic board. I suppose in terms of that funding that's been received from central governments, although we've made assurances to government that funding we spent in this financial year, the grant conditions actually don't explicitly require that. So there's kind of more reputational risk there. However, in previous reports, we've suggested to the strategic board that we implement a option for capital swap. And what that really means is, at the end of this financial year, we'll transfer that 58 million or so across to local authorities in relation to specific projects for investment across local authorities' own capital programme. So we can say to government, the funding has been spent, it's just not been spent on LGF projects. And then during subsequent years, the local authority then funds those projects out of their own capital programme. So the overall LGF contribution, overall SELEP contribution to those projects remains the same. It's just a mechanism that we can use to show to government that we've spent the funding. So the risk there is that we transfer that £58 million across the local authorities, but to do that, we really want that confidence that the projects can definitely proceed. So things like, planning, where there's issues around that, or match contributions, we're really looking for confirmation that these projects can definitely progress and be delivered before we transfer that funding and make those recommendations. So that, what we're calling sort of like an option for capital swap, that will be considered by the board at its last meeting of this financial year. So we'll come back and ask the board to agree that. But I suppose what we don't want to be is stuck in a situation where actually in that meeting we're saying we're not sure whether we should transfer it or not, and not having other options available at that point. So it's really trying to get that assurance from projects as soon as possible, and preferably at that November accountability board meeting, that projects can proceed.
Okay, thank you, Rihanna. I think the other thing I did mention on Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday we met briefly, that we do have a problem with Form 2 in Southend. I think the officers are aware of that, so we probably need to talk about that in a couple of weeks' time, won't we?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of projects I'm aware of emerging issues. Some of those are just because they've come up at this point. Some of them are due to, for example, like university or college term times and where they understand the financial position. So I'm expecting some high risk projects to come back to the board in both October and November, and we would therefore have funding back in the pot and need to explore ways of reallocating that funding. But yeah, so yes, we're having conversations. Some of those aren't reflected in the papers today just because of the timing issues, but certainly they'll be reflected over the next few months. Okay, thank you, Rihanna.
Thank you. So I've got Roger Goff and then David Finch and then Simon Cook. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Just picking up, Rhiannon, on what you were mentioning about things like XEAT and M11 and so on, and indeed, as is indicated, potentially other sources of funding that may get reallocated. And I think we'll come to that on Growing Places Fund as well. So it's really a question, what's the pipeline for replacing some of those? Because I think certainly in case of LGF, I think we've got the Colchester Grow On space, and as far as I can see, unless I've missed something, that's about it. So would we be looking for a further call for projects at some point in the coming months?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There is only one project left on the LGF pipeline, so that's £3.7 million. So there'll be I suspect there'll be funding coming back in the pot over the next few months to fund that. Our intention, so we've got a strategic board meeting on the 2nd of October, and at that meeting we're going to take to the board some options about how the funding should be reinvested. And I think the focus on that has got to be how quickly can we get that funding reinvested and look at options around that. So yeah, those options will be put to the strategic board in roughly a fortnight, so we can start the process around how we reallocate that funding if it comes back into the pot. I think what we don't want is a really big, wide call for funding like we have done previously, where we've been 15 times oversubscribed. That's not useful for anyone at this point in the process. I think it's trying to do something a bit more focused that we can get out the door quite quickly.
Okay, well, I look forward to seeing that.
Chairman, thank you. My apologies for being late joining. I had problems with the link again, and it seems peculiar just to accountability or SELEP meetings that I seem to have a problem. I don't have it with any other board that I use Zoom on. However, I think I missed the point in the discussion around Junction 8 on the M11. Let me be very clear and give you the assurance that when we get to the November decision point, I would expect that Essex has clearly identified the funding stream that supports the continuation of that project and the use of the funding that is available to us. So I want to be very clear and very strong on that point. I do not want to see, I agree that it go on hold, but I do not want any assumptions that any of the funding that's allocated there will be redirected, because I'm very clear we will have the funding that we need for that project.
Thank you. Simon and then Keith. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I might jump around because I think actually there's quite a lot of the papers today that are sort of intrinsically linked with some of the decisions we're making here in this particular one. And I draw toward the end of the papers, particularly some of the risks around projects, not just the deliverability as we've assessed them, but some of the risks of this current period in time. I know that one of our key risks is knowing that construction projects are by their very nature slower to get going or slower to deliver. So I think we probably need to think about some of those risks. So if I go back to what Ron said, I know it's our best guess as opposed to what's in our contract, but what is the real implication of any unspent money going back into government? We've seen it already, haven't we, with a third of that funding being withheld. We've got it now, but I guess there's a real risk, isn't there, as government need whatever money they can get, that we could end up getting that taken away from us quickly.
So the way I think we sort of suspected, we thought we'd get some tougher grant conditions from central government. Actually, the grant conditions are fairly loose in the sense of we have to spend that funding on capital, but it's not restricted to LGF projects, and there's no specific deadline for spending that funding. So actually, government's ability to recall that funding is limited. However, I guess there's a reputational issue about future funding there. So at the moment, we haven't had, for example, the Getting Building Fund confirmed, and whether there'll be a link there between what you spent so far and have you spent that money before you get your next set of funding, or some, there could be a knock-on effect there, I suppose. But I think we're fairly confident government couldn't reclaw the LGF that they've transferred to date. I don't think there's a risk there around that, but I think it's the reputational impact and the impact on future funding that we might receive. So
my follow-up to that, I guess, is elected members might know this better than I, well, certainly know it better than I would. I don't know what officers' views are, but what's our reputation with government like in terms of the money that we've got and the spend and the deliverability of those projects? I.e., if we've got a good reputation, we've probably got less risk about that money disappearing. If we've got a bad reputation, we're probably going to be more likely to lose that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so far today we've got a good reputation in terms of our delivery. So each year we have a review of government and our performance was rated as good. So we're really happy about that. But at the same time, we've made this confirmation to government that we will spend the funding this financial year. I think we can do that by using the option for capital swaps and things. But yeah, reputationally, if we're reporting that £58 million spend beyond the growth deal period, whilst we can justify it in terms of project delays and the issues we faced, yeah, there is a reputational risk there if we can't make sure we've got strong projects that are definitely proceeding.
Thank you. Keith.
Thank you. I just wanted to say it pains me to have to return monies for the Exeter Bridge. We really aren't quite as far advanced as we would want to be, but it still remains a project that we will be bringing back, and hopefully that in future, when colleagues see it return, it'll return with planning permission, with all the funding in place, with an ask of SELEP to cover the gap. So I think on the grounds that even with the capital transfer, we wouldn't have enough time to deliver all that we want to do. It's the right thing for us to do, put that back in the pot. But I just would ask colleagues to accept the fact that this wasn't brought forward just for the sake of it. We really did think we'd be able to get there. Sadly, things have changed. So with that caveat, I'll return the cash and hopefully it can be spent wisely.
Thank you, and we appreciate that very much, Keith. Thank you. Are there any other further questions, or shall we move on this item? Okay, so we are asked to note the updated total spend in 2019-20 of 62.788 million LGF, excluding DFT retained scheme, and 96.394 million, including DFT retained schemes, as set out in Appendix 1 of your papers. We noted that. Thank you. Okay, we are asked to agree the updated total planned LGF spend in 2020-21 of 81.992 million, excluding the DFT retained schemes, and increasing to 111.714 million, including the DFT retained schemes, as set out in Table 1 and Appendix 1. Do you agree?
Agree.
Your hands, please. Roger, are you able to turn your screen on? Thank you. Do you agree? Right, thank you. Rhiannon, that's all right. We are asked to note the deliverability and risk assessment as set out in Appendix 2. And we are asked whether we agree with the reallocation of 2.111 million LGF from the Exeat Bridge project to the LGF project pipeline. We agree? Thank you. Whether we agree to place the LGF spend on hold for the M11 Junction 8 project, and for a further update report to be provided by Essex County Council to the board in November 2020. Agreed? Thank you. Rhiannon, do shout if you're not capturing all the hands, and I'm going too quickly. We note the mitigation action required in relation to high-risk projects as set out in Appendix 3. Thank you. Okay, great, thank you. Let's move on to item 6, which is digitally connected Kent and Medway. Very appropriate, seems I'm having some digital connection problems. I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So yeah, this is the first Getting Building Fund project that's come forward. So there are 34 projects that are prioritised by the Strategic Board, and this project is the first one to complete the IT process. We've received business cases for all of the 34 projects now, and we're looking for those to come forward over the next few board meetings. This particular project that's coming forward today, so it's a project to support broadband connections, particularly in rural areas that are sort of missed off, providing connections to both businesses and residential properties. I'm looking to provide a total of 893 new connections, and it'll be administered for a kind of top-up voucher scheme to provide those connections. It's been through the ITE process, so the Independent Technical Evaluator process. They've started to review all the Getting Building Fund projects, and this one's completed the process, and it's been assessed as presenting high value for money with high certainty of achieving that. So no concerns have been raised by the independent technical evaluators for this project. So the main risk here, just to flag and bring to your attention, as we mentioned under the previous item, we haven't yet received the funding for the Getting Building Fund. So we haven't received the funding, nor received the grant conditions from government either. So we're making this funding award subject to us actually receiving the funding from central government, and then we'll need to be in a position to put service level agreements in place to be able to actually transfer the funding once we've received the conditions from government. We've pushed them on a number of occasions to try and make that available because we understand the urgency, but I think we just haven't received that so far from government. The other point here, just to briefly flag, is in our current assurance framework, we don't yet have a process set out for Getting Building Fund. We didn't know Getting Building Fund was even a thing last time we agreed the assurance framework. So there's a draft of an updated assurance framework under the operations update, and we're looking to agree that at the Strategic Board meeting next month. So really that just means we're following sort of the independent technical evaluation process that we normally use for local growth fund projects, and then we'll be replicating that process in the assurance framework for Getting Building Funds going forward. So yeah, no kind of major concerns in relation to funding. It was considered a strong project by through the assessment.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Questions, anybody? Simon.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One probably not in our remit for accountability, but I'm intrigued to know why we haven't got loads more of these types of projects coming through. Point in question this morning, and it is a rural issue, but it's not isolated to a rural issue. I think we almost need to be asking for more of these type projects coming through, but that's just a view, I guess, that's outside of accountability. My second question is, you said about, of course, we haven't got the GBF fund yet. Is there anything that stops us reallocating this to LGF with the underspend because of its importance and the fact that it has less risks around deliverability?
Yeah, good questions. So I suppose on whether we've got more projects coming forward, there are a few other projects that are coming forward of a similar nature, particularly from Essex. So we're expecting those to come forward either October or November. So we'll see some projects coming forward of that nature. I suppose there is a wider question about how we reallocate the local growth funds, and digital connectivity could be a priority for that, and that'd be certainly a discussion that we take to the strategic board next month. On the reallocation of funding between funding streams, that is something we're looking at, I suppose, behind the scenes to work out more just a kind of accounting sort of swaps rather than necessarily explicitly changing the funding streams for the project. Government at the moment have identified these projects. Any changes to that list would need to go back to government. So ideally, I think we'd keep it as a getting building fund project, but there might be some ways that we need to try and manage the funding going forward, I suppose, to make sure it's all spent in the timescales that are prescribed by government.
Thanks, Simon. Some good questions. Rodney. You're on mute, Rodney.
This is desperately needed. As I said whilst I was mute, I'm being a bit parochial here, but I think it equally applies to the rest of the land area of Kent as it does in Medway, that if we're to get business growth in our rural areas, we desperately need an improvement to what we have now in the digital connectivity that we've got. And any way this can be pushed forward would be to the benefit of those in both the rural areas of Kent and Medway.
Thank you, Rodney. And as we remind ourselves, part of the point of the Getting Building Fund is to deliver exactly what this kind of thing, getting work done quickly in order to enable our businesses and our communities to be in a better position going forwards. So it's really great to see this is the first of several that will come forward to Accountability Board over the next little while. And I just wanted to record my thanks to the officers for moving this forward very quickly, because these kind of things are, as you say, really urgent. So, Mark.
Yeah, can I just have a clarification then? Because the government hasn't done anything with Getting Building Fund, because I thought it had, that we've got the terms and it's the funding streams agreed on and it's coming forward. If it hasn't, I understand it's got to be spent by next year in this financial year. And so it goes back to the first one, that is a reputational risk to us that we don't spend, and then we can't spend this because we've got funding quicker, the more than what I do agree with Simon, that the quicker they come, and it's a shame that there's only one here today. But then that would put the pressure on central government as well. It's the same way, so that you can't have it both ways. You can't delay us spending this by March next year. This is dropped onto us very quickly over the summer. We've got the schemes ready, and the quicker we can get some more schemes of these coming to this board as quick as possible, maybe at the next meeting, would be the better thing. And if there's any pressure to build that up, because I don't see the difference with the two items. I've very intrinsically linked between this, that we're delaying one. We've got 60 million and can't spend by the beginning of the years, and they can't make us spend these by next March.
Thank you, Mark. Good point. Am I right, Rhiannon? We have confirmation that we are going to be allocated the GBF money. What we don't have is the details of that agreement.
Yes. So I'm informed press releases and minister announcements, but what we haven't yet had is any formal grants termination or confirmation of the split of funding. So we'll receive we're expecting to receive some of the funding this financial year, and some of the funding next financial year. But we haven't yet had confirmation about that split and the conditions around it, whether they are genuinely going to restrict us to spend within those 2 financial years. Yeah, we're pushing governments and that message that Councillor Coxall mentioned around you can't have both ways of, if you delay things at our side, if you delay things and getting the grant and out to us, that's going to have a knock-on impact on how quickly we can spend it. So yeah, we're trying to make that case to government, or we need to try and make that case to government over the next few weeks.
Thank you. Stephanie, did you turn your video on because you wanted to say something?
I was just going to offer some additional advice if that's helpful. Thank you, Sarah. So I just want to say from the accountable body perspective that clearly, because we've not yet received the grant conditions, we're not in a position to know exactly where we stand in terms of the requirements from governments. If we'd received those conditions and we were clear about that, then that would offer up the considerations that could be put forward about alternative uses of funding. Until we have that clarity, that it's very high risk to take any alternative approach. And that would be the accountable body advice.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to move on whether we approve the award of £2,290,152 GBF to support the delivery of the project as set out in Appendix A, subject to sufficient GBF being received by SELEP from central government. Is that approved? Hands, please. Thank you. And note that the GBF grant and associated conditions have not been received from central government at the point of this report being published. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on now to item 7, which is the Queensway Gateway Road project update. Helen, you're going to give an overview here now, I believe.
Yes, thank you. So as we've outlined at previous meetings, this project has been identified as high risk due to ongoing land acquisition issues which are delaying completion of the project. So the report provided sets out an overview on an update of delivery on both the temporary connection, which is being delivered as an interim measure while the land acquisition issues are resolved, and the permanent connection. In summary, it's expected that the temporary connection will be complete and will be in use by the end of the calendar year, which will allow traffic to use the road as a through route. Work is continuing to progress the permanent connection. However, the delivery of the final phase of this is dependent upon completion of the land acquisition that is ongoing. So at the moment, as it stands, acquisition negotiations are ongoing with one party, but use of a CPO has been identified as the most effective way of progressing the land acquisition of land owned by the other affected parties. And East Sussex County Council have agreed in principle to promote the compulsory purchase order, subject to receipt of the required information. As a result of the dependency upon the completion of the land acquisition, the timetable for delivery of the final and connecting phase of the permanent connection is still uncertain at this stage, and it is therefore proposed that at the next at the November board meeting a more in-depth update is provided, which provides greater insight in regard to the project budget, progress on the land acquisition, and the timetable for delivery of the permanent connection. I think that's all I'll say on that, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. You know, this project has been dragging on, and there's a lot of work going on. It is deliverable. We are confident as an accountable body for the grant from that it can be delivered. I think it's unfortunate that we will need another report back, but all I can say is the temporary link is up and running, and the permanent solution, the smaller my inbox will be on a weekly basis. So I have a personal view that it needs to happen and needs to happen very quickly. So thank you for that. And so hopefully my colleagues will support the recommendation before them today.
Thank you, Keith. Are there any other questions or comments? Simon.
Sorry, one more, just out of interest. How long does it, this might be one of those how long's a piece of string questions. How long roughly would it take for a CPO to go through? Is it how long is a piece of string conversation, is it?
Are officers able to help me on this, or Keith?
I've personally not been involved in a CPO. I would hope that I still hope that we could negotiate the way through it. But if CPO is there, it'll be as quick as the courts allow it, I guess, because you are involved not just in local government world. You actually go into the courts. So I can't give a date. Rihanna does.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm not going to give an exact date or anything. I think that's part of the report we're looking to come back at the next meeting, is to provide greater, I'm sure at that point it won't even be an exact date, but I think some indicative timescales for that process might be helpful for the board, and we'll ask that to come back at the next meeting.
Thank you. So I have Councillor Finch and then Councillor Coxall.
Well, Chairman, all I wanted to say that the compulsory purchase process can be very long-winded, given whether or not the landowner objects and whether there are other parties that object as well. So I think it's right that we do have a review and an update on the project, and I am assured by what Councillor Glazier has said that he's determined to deliver this, and knowing his reputation, I'm sure that this will be delivered. Nevertheless, I think it is important that we do have a more detailed programme or report that identifies the point that's already been raised, which is how long is a piece of string, and is it one that the leader of East Sussex has confidence he can shorten that piece of string.
Thank you. Councillor Coxall.
Yeah, well, a long history of CPOs in Thurrock, so we've remembered for so many times. But I just want a clarification that if it's delayed because of we're pushing a CPO, has the council made a formal application to actually have a CPO and through their cabinet decision or for their council decision that there's a CPO process, and sometimes that pressures the partner, the part of the land, to actually come into negotiations at a quicker stage, because you've got from that is a long term process of going to the Secretary of State, asking that before you get to court. So the court process is right at the end of it. It's getting to that stage for the actual public body stage of it and getting to government to asking for that power to be devolved.
If you want me to answer, the council has in principle agreed to do it. We haven't taken it forward through that process yet, because we do hope just the in principle will get the people around the table to solve this without going that way.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm coming in and out a bit. I'm having more internet problems, but just to, so I would, unless there are any other questions, I'd like us to note the latest position on the delivery of the project. Noted. And also whether we agree that the board will be provided with a further update on the project at its meeting on the 20th of November 2020. This report will provide a full update on the delivery of the permanent connection, including consideration of progress on the required land acquisitions, the delivery programme and the project budget. Is that agreed? Can I see your hands, please? Okay, thank you. Okay, so now I'd like to move on to item 8, which is the A28 Surrey Link Road. I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon in a minute, but I just felt I should note to you all that I have received, as has Roger Goff, received a letter from the leader of Canterbury Council, and it's in it he says that he would like us to that he's reaffirming the commitment of Canterbury City Council to doing all that it can to deliver the scheme, and that they've been working tirelessly with the developers on it. That they would like us to note that the allocated housing development at Surrey would provide 1,000 new homes and is an important contributor to the district's housing supply as identified in their local plan, and it's integral to the strategic development. and also that it would have an impact if it didn't go ahead on the 2,000 homes planned for the nearby Hurston and a further 3,000 homes at Herne Bay, and they would not have been put forward in the 2017 local plan. They also believe that the Surrey Relief Road also has wider East Kent significance. It's the principal route connecting Thanet and Canterbury and Ashford, and note on the current traffic congestion at the Surrey level crossing, which increases journey times between those districts. He believes that the Relief Road is crucial to the delivery of the council's local plan and is a key piece of infrastructure for the East Kent area. But without the grant, the viability of the housing development is precarious and the delivery of the Relief Road is at risk. So he is asking us to consider positively the recommendation within the report. So without just noting that, I'm then going to hand over to Rhiannon, and also just to note that this project came first to us in 2016, I believe. So I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon now.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you said, yeah, it came forward initially and was awarded funding in June 2016. So it's one that's been considered for quite some time by the board, and you've received updates on the project for the last few meetings. So I won't repeat again the detail of the project, but just to highlight the issues around planning consent for the actual project itself and those developers that are due to financially contribute to the scheme. So we don't yet have the planning for the scheme for the residential development or confirmation of that fund, the contributions that are due to be made by the developers that are required to complete the funding package for the project. So there's a fair few risks remaining for the project. I think what we're looking to do here is seek that confirmation that we can definitely either proceed with the project or actually that funding considered for reallocation. The timescales for the project, so they've slipped, and we're now looking at the actual completion of the project by roughly February 2024. There are also some issues around potential risk of CPO as well for this project, although I understand negotiations are already happening with the landowners and have been fairly positive so far. But I think the two have kind of been done in parallel, that the negotiations and progressing towards the CPO. Due to the fact that the LGF has been spent beyond the growth deal period, we also need to seek approval from the Strategic Board as well, that spend can go beyond the 30th of September 2021. So it's going beyond the extension already agreed by the Strategic Board, which is to make sure the Strategic Board are also comfortable with that extension, as it's a high-risk project. We're joined as well by Simon Thomas from Canterbury City Council, who's, I think, if we're happy, Chair, we'll hand over to give a brief update on the planning and how that's progressing. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you very much. Yes, I can just update you on the planning position. Thankfully, I have a positive update. We've been working very closely with the developers and Natural England on the ecology issue, which is explained in the report in front of you. And it was yesterday we have now finalised the draft appropriate assessment and sent that to Natural England. We're anticipating a positive response from them within the next week. As soon as we have that, we will adopt the appropriate assessment, and then the planning applications will be reported to the planning committee. So assuming we have a positive response from Natural England next week, we will be looking at reporting the applications to planning committee within the next 2 to 3 weeks. In terms of the developer funding, as the report explains, there's a significant amount of developer funding here. So the planning applications that we hope to determine very shortly, or a resolution from the planning committee on very shortly, it would include a section 106 that would provide that developer funding, and we're very advanced in our discussions around that 106. So as soon as we get the resolution, hopefully from the planning committee to approve, it won't then be very long at all. It'll be a matter of weeks before the section 106 is signed and the planning permission is formally issued. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I know Roger would like to say something.
Thank you, Sarah. And firstly, as you mentioned, you and I were both in receipt of the letter from Councillor Fitter Harding, who is the new leader of Canterbury City Council, which I think sets out their commitment to it. And we just heard what Simon was describing also in relation to the process, particularly vis-a-vis, or progress rather, particularly vis-a-vis the appropriate assessment. So I think if that is all able to be taken forward, and as Simon's just mentioned, all the latest news is positive, then there is then the scope for it potentially to go to our element of it, the Kent County Council element of it, to go to our planning committee in early November. So there is, therefore, it would seem to me that option one is jumping the gun. I appreciate we've had, and indeed I've talked about it, I think, at several of these meetings. We've had delays on this project in the past, but there is, I think, quite a clear pathway forward. The City Council clearly very committed to it. The County Council are also supportive, willing to look also to forward funding in terms of securing some of the some appropriate bonds for that, and therefore we would be able to hopefully get this through both parts of the planning process, and for us to submit the financial report in the time that's indicated within option 2, which is the one that I very much hope the board will opt for.
Thank you, Roger. Are there any other questions from members of the board? Mark?
Yeah, so if it's option 2, that does mean that if this doesn't happen by November, that would mean that there would be reallocation at that same meeting.
It's not the way the recommendation is worded at the moment, but we could amend the recommendation to word in that way if you so wished.
Simon, thank you.
So picking up on that point, would we still feel fairly confident that we haven't delayed the reallocation of any money if we have to, i.e. the projects that project in the pipeline still deliverable by November, or from if a decision is delayed till November?
So yeah, I think that's the reason that we've put that November deadline in there, is because that is the final opportunity to then bring something alternative forwards to the meeting. So I think although the wording of the recommendation at the moment isn't a kind of hand back the money if you don't meet that deadline, is a kind of automatic reallocation. I think the wording in the report, we are saying that we're really strongly advising the board that that's the kind of the last chance almost, because that will be the last opportunity to reallocate that funding to an alternative project. Simon helpfully outlined the fact that whilst the planning still needs to will be confirmed hopefully over the next weeks, we also need to make sure the funding package is also confirmed and have that confirmation from Kent. So I think having that planning at least confirmed by the planning confirmed by November gives us a chance then at the February meeting to say, is the funding package definitely there, so we can transfer the funding for the project. So yeah, really strongly recommend to the board that we do stick to that November deadline if we're going for the option 2.
Okay, that's helpful, because I think I'd probably read that and thought that option 1, if it wasn't decided now, would be too late to go back at that later on. So I'm happy with that explanation. And sorry, second part, in 8.7, I think it infers that even if we have to make a decision to no longer support it, there is funding still available for the project to go ahead, which is sort of a bit counter to what I think the leader said in his letter, or I maybe misheard in what you worded to us.
Do you mind if I come in?
Yes, go on, Rhian.
Yeah, so I think the delivery of the link road is integral for that development coming forward. So almost it will be delivered whether the funding's there or not, in the sense of if it's not funding through LGF, those contributions will need to come from other sources. And I think the indication that I received from Kent County Council is actually the contributions to, I think it's education or wider social other provisions those developers would be expected to make. Perhaps social health, I can't remember what it was exactly, sorry, I've completely forgotten.
It was housing, it says on the report
it's housing.
Affordable housing, thank you. So affordable housing, that the contributions to that would reduce as an impact of needing to then fund the additional costs around the link road.
Thank you. Keith?
Thank you. I think I missed something in there somewhere. So the comment about should it not be successful, can we reallocate it at the November meeting? Does that mean that it would just go to the next one on the pipeline, or does it mean that we would be, if you like, at risk asking people to work something up that then may not get funded? Because, you know, I mean, let's be positive and come back to November and this is all resolved. So the person that then done that extra work thinking actually there might be something in the pipeline, does that mean that they will be let down? So it's just really about a sequential thing. I mean, at the end of the day, if it's not going to be ready by November, I understand the money will be coming back. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem that I had was that I thought one of the suggestions was that we then reallocate it on the same day. I just need to know the process of that.
So we're looking to take options to the strategic board about how we would reallocate that funding if it does come back into the pots. I think the timing would probably mean that actually that alternative project wouldn't come forward until February. So I think there might be some a level of abortive work, but we're trying to reduce that as much as possible. And again, the recommendations we'll make to the strategic board, I think we're just looking for a kind of a smaller number of projects to come forward that might be able to use some of this funding, rather than having a big wave of new applications coming forward. When it's a case of there might be funding or there might not. And you know, we appreciate the amount of work that goes into that kind of bidding stage.
Mark.
Yeah. No. What I just can answer, Keith. I was just thinking of combining 1 and 2, so that the reallocation will happen, because that's what we're not going to. I'm not for that at the moment. I've heard it and understand that, and I don't think that's an option. Option 1 is an option that we should be taking a decision today. But I think that line should be in option 2 as well. So we made the decision that. It says if this is not headed up by this and the assurance by Essex County Council by November 2020, then the reallocation of remaining funds of the scheme will go into the existing pipeline. It just amalgamates the 2 items into one. Otherwise, we would have made a decision today, option 1. We would have done that anyway. I'm not saying reallocate it, but it's going to be. It says it in the option 1. So I just say take the two option, make the whole lot together. So it extends the deadline to planning consent. And if this does not happen by these 2 dates, the reallocation of funding will happen.
Yeah, if Chair, you're happy, perhaps we want to put to the board then the option 2. The members might want to vote on that, but with the additional recommendation that the board agree, if the deadlines are set out in option 2 are not met, then the funding will be automatically reallocated to the next project on the pipeline, as that pipeline is agreed by the strategic board.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Ron?
Yeah, I understand what Mark is saying. I just I don't want us to get into this. If you don't meet it, it's gone. I think we do need that further discussion in November, because there might be other options or discussions around this. And I just feel, I understand what Mark's trying to do, but I just don't want it to be that pure black and white, if you know what I mean. I think we need, as a group, discuss this in November to make sure we're making the right decision. And if that decision is to return the money, then that's fine. But I really don't want it to be such a black and white scenario.
Thanks, Ron. Are there any other comments from anybody? So, Councillor Finch.
Thank you, Chair. I just would support what Ron said. I think that's a sensible approach to the issue at hand.
Okay, so it sounds to me like we're going to discuss option 2 first of all in terms of voting, if that's all right, in terms of due process, Rhiannon. So we look at option 2 and we're going to vote on that now. I'm happy to take to vote what Mark is proposing, if you would like, and then we, can consider that, and everybody can vote on that extra item as well. But for the time being, let's go first to option 2, which is to agree to extend the deadline until the 20th of November 2020 for planning consent to be secured for the Broad Oak Farm and Surrey development and the project itself. Is everybody happy for that? Okay. So there was an additional suggestion from Mark that we then add, agree the reallocation of the 4.791 million unspelt LGF to the next project in the LGF pipeline if the project is unable to confirm delivery on the 20th of November. Do people agree with that? Okay, looks like that is not agreed with. Sorry, Mark, thank you very much. Agree that written confirmation must be provided by Kent County Council to SELEP accountable body by the 12th of February 2021 to confirm the funding package is in place for the project to enable the release of the remaining 4.791 million LGF to Kent County Council for the delivery of the project beyond 31st of March 2021. Can I see your hand, please? If you agree. Thank you. Rhiannon, is that right? And note that SELEP Limited will also be required to approve the spend of LGF beyond the growth deal. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on now to item 9, which is the Bexhill Enterprise Park North update. Helen, I believe I'm handing over to you here. There are 2 options on the table at the moment.
Yes, thank you. So as set out previously, this project is considered to be high risk due to the refusal of the reserved matters planning application. And so following decisions at previous board meetings, the project is currently on hold awaiting the outcome of the planning appeal. The appeal has been delayed as a result of the measures introduced to slow the spread of COVID-19, but the planning inspectorate have now confirmed that the planning appeal will commence on the 19th of January 2021, with a decision expected mid to late February. As mentioned, the report sets out 2 options for consideration. Option 1 would see the project remain on hold until the planning appeal has been concluded, with the LGF funding allocation being withdrawn if the appeal is unsuccessful. Under this option, the LGF funded enabling works would be delivered by the end of May 2021, so within the 6-month extension to the growth deal period previously agreed by the strategic board. The delivery of the planned employment workspace on the site is dependent upon the successful conclusion of the planning appeal. This option therefore provides greater certainty regarding the delivery of the planned employment workspace and therefore the realisation of the benefits set out within the project business case, whilst also reducing the risk of abortive spend on the project. Option 2 would see the LGF funding being withdrawn and reallocated to the next project on the LGF project pipeline at this stage. This option has been proposed due to the significant delays faced by the project as a result of the refusal of the reserved matters application and the delays in hearing the planning appeal. In addition, there remains a risk that the planning appeal will be unsuccessful, meaning that it will not be possible to bring forward the planned employment workspace on the site. This will result in a failure to realise the benefits set out within the business case. The board will not be able to receive assurances regarding the delivery of the employment workspace until after the outcome of the appeal is known in mid to late February 2021. Should the planning appeal be unsuccessful, there will be no opportunity for the LGF funding to be reallocated to an alternative project prior to the end of the official growth deal period on the 31st of March 2021. This will mean that it wouldn't be possible to evidence full spend of the LGF funding at the 31st of March, as previously, in line with assurances previously given to government. So the board are asked to consider those 2 options. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Keith.
Sorry, hit the wrong button. I mean, this again is a key project for North Bexhill. It's in the local plan. There is a disagreement over the environmental conditions on what is put forward, and it's an embarrassment to me this again hasn't been resolved. It has now got a date for the inspector's the appeal. I don't want to preempt that, but you know, delivery of business space on this site is a given. All we've got to do is either win, the applicant has to win the appeal, or else another application goes in. And I have assurances that should the appeal be successful, the timescales for activating and implementing this piece of work is of a very short nature, and that they could actually be on site within weeks and could deliver it. It does depend entirely on the appeal. As I say, it's an embarrassment to me in as much as it's part of the key plan for North Bexhill. All of the work that's been done in that area is about generating space for houses and for jobs. And so I can only hope that this is resolved by the inspectorate and that we can get on and deliver it. And so therefore I ask colleagues to accept the first option, which allows us to wait until we hear from the inspector.
Thank you, Keith. Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I very much support what Keith just said. I think, again, we are at a point with a particular project that is in itself of significance, which is dependent on one thing, which we now have a date. I cannot see any reason why we would close down our options at this point, so I would certainly support option 1.
Mark, thank you.
Yeah, I see this one as a different kettle of fish compared to the previous one. I've got, I think this one is unforeseen circumstances. I've actually delayed this. We should wait to a planning decision before any decision should be made of where we should go forward. And I completely agree with option 1. It's completely different kettle than the previous item.
Thank you, Mark. So, unless there are any other queries, I'd like us to note the latest position on the delivery of the project. And let's discuss option 1 first, which is whether we agree that the project remains on hold until the planning appeal has been concluded, and if successful, planning consent has been granted. Do we agree that? It's unanimous to me. Agree that the LGF spend on the delivery of the project beyond 440,000 already transferred to East Sussex County Council should remain paused until the planning appeal has been concluded, and if successful, planning consent has been granted. Do we agree that? And agree that if the planning appeal is unsuccessful, that the full 1.94 LGF allocation will be returned to SELEP for reallocation through the LGF project pipeline. That agreed. Yeah, no, we're right. I couldn't see everybody's hand then, but that's just me. Okay, thank you. Great. Thank you very much. So it doesn't look like we need to discuss. Oh. Sorry, I mute for a moment. Thank you. Right, let's move on now to item 10, which is the award of Growing Places Fund. I'm going to hand over to Helen again.
Thank you. So following strategic board agreement of the GPF project pipeline in June 2020, the board are asked to consider the award of funding to the first 3 of the new GPF projects. Full project details are set out in the report and the accompanying appendices, so I'm just going to keep this quite high level. The first project seeking funding approval is the Wine Innovation Centre, which is seeking £600,000 of Growing Places Fund investment. This project, which has been brought forward by NIAB EMR, seeks to support Kent's wine sector to develop as global leaders in innovation. The Wine Innovation Centre will allow NIAB EMR to support the viticulture sector in the adoption of new technologies which are needed to increase productivity and the adoption of sustainable production methods. The project has been reviewed by the independent technical evaluator and has been assessed as offering high value for money with low to medium certainty of achieving this. It is noted that whilst a proportionate approach to the economic appraisal of the project has been taken, the lack of a full monetised economic appraisal reduces the certainty of the value for money categorisation. As explained in the report, the project meets the criteria of the value for money exemption 1 as set out in the SELEP assurance framework. However, the board are asked to consider the risk that the lack of a full monetised benefit cost analysis presents before determining whether or not to approve funding to the project. The second project under consideration is the Green Hydrogen Generation Facility, which is seeking £3.47 million of GPF investment. This project will bring forward the UK's first utility-scale green hydrogen plant with enough capacity to meet fuel demand from hundreds of fuel cell buses and cars daily, representing an important step towards reducing reliance on nuclear and coal as the main sources of power and the realisation of decarbonisation targets in the southeast. It is worth noting that the success of this project is dependent upon the level of hydrogen fuel demand increasing over the next few years. Evidence has been provided by the scheme promoter to demonstrate that decarbonising transport is likely to become an increasing political priority over the coming years, with hydrogen fuel as a key consideration. The project has been assessed by the ITE and has been assessed as offering high value for money with high certainty of achieving this. The final project under consideration at this meeting is the Observer Building Phase 1A, which is seeking £1.75 million of GPF investment. It should also be noted that the project has been provisionally allocated funding from the Getting Building Fund to support Phase 1B of the project, which will be brought forward to the same timescales. The board will be asked to consider the award of this funding at the October board meeting. So this project will see the Observer Building in Hastings return to productive use after sitting empty for 35 years. The building will offer a variety of uses, including commercial, leisure and residential. The project seeks to offer opportunities for those in the hardest to reach economically deprived communities in Hastings, and the project has a key role to play in catalysing the wider revitalisation of Hastings Town Centre. And just to note that since the ball papers were published, the project has been awarded planning permission. The ITE has assessed the project as offering high value for money with high certainty of achieving this. I think I'll leave it there unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Helen. Are there any questions or comments on any of these? Simon and then Ron, thank you.
Forgive me if this is a really stupid question, but I might have missed something. The Wine Innovation Centre bid, which is Kent based, the GPF was the money that came, the 85 million that came through very quickly, wasn't it? And I don't, am I talking about a different fund? I remember us looking at this region. I don't ever remember seeing this project coming up in our big debate that came up around funds. So am I talking about a different pot of money, am I? Okay, thank you. That's right, I'll shut up.
Thanks, Simon. Yes, so that's confirmed. Different fund. Okay. Sorry, was it Ron? Next, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Taking on board, following on from really Simon's comment, really, we know that this money on the Growing Places Fund has to be returned, and we may be looking at monies becoming available from our Growing Places Fund. And I just wonder whether or not we could use that to fund these, which will then give us an opportunity to get some of the other projects on the list below these three on our Growing Places Fund in terms of funding. I think this is an opportunity because of the carryover of funding from various projects, whether or not we can miss and match here and try to use that money to bring a lot of the projects that we got on in this sort of program with the money that's in our other funds that we're doing. So yeah, so I just wonder whether we can do that, and does it give us an opportunity then to make sure that we spend the monies that might come back to the pot but then of course we've then got the Growing Places Fund going forward for other projects that might become available next year.
Thanks, Ron. Rhiannon, do you want to answer that? And then I'll go to Mark as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, the strategic board meeting, a pipeline of Growing Places funds, so the capital loan projects that they were agreed. So there are some projects that sit below the few we're considering today and in November as well. We are expecting some repayments to be made as well from existing GPF projects. So actually, if they do come in, there is already some sort of funding that's already in this revolving pot that could actually be used towards funding some of those that sit lower down on the GBF. I've got the right GPF, sorry, Growing Places Fund pipeline already. So there is a mechanism that we can help support some of these projects if we do get those repayments. I think it sort of goes back to Steph's point around the conditions that we have around for the getting building funds, and whether we can use that as loan or if it's restricted to sort of capital grant funding. Perhaps there is some flexibility around the local growth fund and whether we can invest some of that in Growing Places Fund projects. I think we just need to be mindful of the criteria that we set out initially for these sorts of projects, because it's a revolving loan, we're attracting different sorts of projects. But I think that's certainly something we can consider as part of the report that goes to the October strategic board meeting, to see, what pool of projects we should be using, what pool of projects we should be looking at if there is unspent available from LGF or any other funding stream.
Yeah,
so yeah, an action we'll take away and look at that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it just means we've got opportunities here, one way or the other, and if we can do as much as we can, I think we should try and do it. But I'll leave it up to yourselves.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Rhiannon. And I think, as Rhiannon's pointed out, kind of if we were going to be reallocating money, we would need to go in across those funds. If the criteria enabled us to, we would need to go back to strategic board on that. Mark.
Yep, mine's it's not actually about these three items then. So Simon started an item there. I think before we do need a wider conversation, and I think strategic board is the right place to have that. But my personal preference is that before we reallocate any money from the local growth fund, if there is not enough pipeline projects are there, and bring them into here, I think we should be looking at the Growing Places Fund, getting building fund, and so many the three funds first, because there's pipelines there. There was a lot of work done on them over summer, and quite a few of them. You've got to remember that the local growth fund, so that does have to have a restriction that it's capital funding. And if that sits much nicer in the Getting Buildings Fund, if there's some projects there that the government hasn't funded, and all the work has been done over the summer on some of these projects, and there's a good pipeline there that we could reallocate across before we come into here. I think this money coming back here now that the third's come in, and I'm assuming that we're going to be reallocating now. We had some held some money there in case of the finances, as I understand. And then that can be reallocated at the next thing. So there should be enough money there. But if you do want Ron's suggestion, I think we do need a wider conversation if we're transferring these and to match your legal obligations, so making sure we don't break that. But my personal preference is if there is any money left, then it should be looking at getting building funds, getting first before this one.
Thank you, Mark. Good points. And it is so confusing having a GPF and a GBF. I have to say, maybe we can rename them at some point or something. I don't know. Anyway, thank you very much. So, and thanks, Helen. So I'd like to move that we approve the award of 600,000 GPF by way of loan to support the delivery of the Wine Innovation Centre project as set out in Appendix C, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with low/medium certainty of achieving this. We approve the 3.470 million GPF by way of loan to support the delivery of the Green Hydrogen Generation Facility project as set out in Appendix D, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with high certainty of achieving this. Thank you. And that we approve the 1.75 million GPF by way of loan to support the delivery of the Observer Building Hastings Phase 1 project as set out in Appendix E, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with high certainty of achieving this. We approve that. Thank you all. Okay.
Sarah, if I can just come in, if I missed the first vote, I am in favour of it.
Okay, sorry, did I move too swiftly, Rhiannon? Did you see all the hands then?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I think same would go for me, because I think I was slightly slow on the camera, but in favour.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so item 11, which is an update on the Growing Places Fund. Thank you, Helen.
So, I've provided the usual report, which gives an overview of the GPF programme. So I'm just going to pick up on a couple of the main points from the report. So the report summarises the key overarching risks faced by the GPF projects as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. These risks include the effect of social distancing measures on construction practices, the impact on the property sales and rental market, and the risk of reduced income from commercial tenants. As a result of these risks and other impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of projects have identified repayment risks, and it is expected that a number of these will be brought to the board for consideration at the November meeting. The cash flow set out within the report reflects the repayment risks of which have been identified in the report and will be updated as repayment schedules are brought forward for board consideration. At this meeting, the board are asked to consider the revised repayment schedule for the Eastbound Fisherman's Quay and Infrastructure Development Project. Work has now commenced on site on the delivery of this project. However, the start of works was significantly delayed due to a number of factors. The majority of the GPF loan will be repaid through a European Maritime and Fisheries Fund grant. This grant remains secure. However, it can only be claimed in arrears following provision of evidence of spend. Therefore, as a result of the start of works on site being delayed, drawdown of the grant has also been impacted. The remaining balance of the GPF loan will be repaid in 22-23 using increased revenues which are generated as a result of the delivery of the project. I think that covers the main areas of the report, unless anyone has any queries.
Thanks, Helen. Are there any queries? No. So it's for us to note the updated position on the GPF programme and in particular to approve the revised repayment schedule for the Eastbound Fisherman's Quay and Infrastructure Development Project, and agree that despite repayments not being made in line with the original repayment schedule, no interest will be charged on the loan. Do people agree with that?
Sorry, Chair, is that no additional interest or no interest at all?
Helen?
That's no interest at all.
As members will remember, in the previous accountability board, I think we also had agreed for Charleston and for the historic dockyard not to pay interest. So it's in line with what we had agreed with other projects previously when they had requested that. Does that, are you happy, Ron?
Yes, I'm fine, Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, thanks. So did we approve that? Did we see hands raised on that one, that last matter? Thank you, just for clarity. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'd like to hand over to Suzanne, who's going to give us an operations update. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to hand over to Ree, who's going to cover off the first part about the extension of the ITE contract.
Suzanne. So yeah, the steer contract. So 2016, we went out and did a large procurement exercise to appoint the independent technical evaluator. And that involved various partners from across local authorities to create a board to kind of assess those panels. Sorry, a panel to assess the applications that came forward for that consultancy contract. That contract is ending at the end of this financial year. we've used the IT for various aspects of work, including prioritisation of projects, as well as independent assessment of business cases before they've been considered by this board as well. Our recommendation to the board is actually that contracts worked well. Steer's role was always to provide a critical evaluation of projects, which can be fairly challenging, I suppose. No one really wants to hear negative feedback on their projects, but I do think they've been able to strike a good balance between providing critical feedback, but also supporting applicants through the process. In terms of take the kind of next steps in terms of the contracts, we do have options to go out and do a larger contract awards. I do think there are pressures in terms of my team over the next few months to actually go through a big kind of procurement exercise. We're very much focused on trying to get the Getting Building Fund projects through to the board so we can approve these projects and get them started. So our recommendation is actually we look at using a framework where we could procure Steer for an additional sort of 1+1 year contract to give us that continuity of resource there over the next sort of few years without needing to go out to the market immediately. I think there's also uncertainty around future funding streams. So we've had the Getting Building Funds, but I think we're all waiting for the Shared Prosperity Funds and to understand what the resource requirements might be on that IT contract going forward. And at the moment, we're not really in a position to say, we're definitely going to have these projects coming forward over the next few years. We're in quite a difficult position to do that. So as part of this report, we're recommending to the board that we appoint Steer as a direct award for a Bloom framework, which means there's already been an assessment of value for money and sort of their competency and things to provide that service. But we use that contract initially for a kind of 1+1 year. So that gives us an option to extend the contract for a year, do a kind of assessment after that initial year to see if it's working. Is it the right time to do a bigger, larger procurement exercise? And if it's not, we've got the option of a further 1 year extension on that contract. At the end of that 2 year, I think we should provide the commitment to the board that we would do a bigger procurement exercise, just because, to make sure we're fully complying with public procurement expectations. And also hopefully would have greater certainty at that point around future funding streams as well to be able to do that. I don't know if there's any questions on that particular item. If not, I'll hand back to Suzanne to present the rest of the report.
Yeah, Roger would like to speak. So I think actually if we can deal with this item first and then go on to the other items on the assurance framework, please. Roger.
Yeah, thanks. So my question is whether I entirely take the point that we're not going to want to rush into anything in terms of re-procurement at this point, given, as Rhiannon says, all the scale of pressure that there is on the team and in terms of delivering things. Question is whether 1+1 is pushing it a bit far. Would there be a case of simply doing a 1 year extension would be my question on that, because there's a lot of uncertainty we still have as to when the money's going to arrive from government, what's going to be happening, etc., etc. So I wonder whether we are locking ourselves in a little bit with 1+1.
Yeah, I think the 1+1, I think it gives us also more flexibility than just doing a straight 2 year contract. Perhaps if board members did want, what we could do is come back to the board this time next year to assess again, are we in a position now that we want to do a bigger procurement exercise, or we're happy to extend for a further year. I think just appointing in a 1+1 sort of framework gives us that option, but after that first year, we could come back to the board and the board could decide to terminate that contract after the first year if we felt we're in a position to do something bigger, or we just purely didn't need that contract anymore.
Okay, so there would be a reasonable degree of flexibility anyway, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think so, but we could agree that we'll come back to the board, this time next year to confirm the board's still comfortable that we progress in that way.
I personally would be really comfortable with that, yeah.
Thank you. Keith.
Oh, God, technology. Sorry.
Get better broadband.
Just the point is, are the terms and conditions likely to be any better if you have a 1+1 than just a 1? I mean, if it is just a simple a renewal of a contract and the terms remain the same, don't have a problem. If there's any savings in having a 1+1, then I guess that's the only financial saving I'm talking. That's the only thing that would then incentivise me to do it on that way. Otherwise, I'm quite happy to go back to single year.
Very good question. Thank you. Rhiannon, are you able to answer that?
I think we need to do a bit more digging into the cost savings that we could achieve through that. I think, would it be acceptable to the board if we look at the option of a 1+1 option and a 1 year, just a pure 1 year extension, and compare those options and I guess procure on that basis, but with the commitment that we'd come back to the board after a year anyway, and either terminate that 1+1 contract, or we would just, sorry, I haven't explained that very well, have I? Oh, I've got stuck there, haven't I? Suzanne, do you want to come in and rescue me?
I come in because I think the 1+1 option gives us a bit of security following 12 months. We don't know. Everything is very, very uncertain at the moment. There might be another tranche of funding that comes out that we need to deal with, and we wouldn't want, if we've only got a 1 year option, then we've got to go through a renewal or something like that. That could really be very disruptive. Whereas having the 1+1 gives us a little bit of security there. If we're not happy with what they're doing, or if things have changed, we can then break at that 12 months point. But if we need to knock on, we can. So that's sort of, we're trying to hedge our bets a little bit around this very, very sort of uncertain environment that we're in at the moment.
Thanks, Suzanne. I've got David, Mark, and then Ron. Thank you.
In a way, I'm saying what Suzanne just said. This 2-year contract with a break clause at the end of 1 year, which is the simple way, I think, of saying it. The other point to make is around whether the extension for a second year is wise. Will we take that decision later in the year? Because you would need to make sure that you had a crossover, you had another company ready to step into the frame to pick up the work that Steer do for us. What you would not want to have is a break clause that then you had to go out looking for someone to do that consultancy and that work to give you the value for money, for example, and the assurance on those projects. So I think the proposal of 2 years with the break clause is right, but just recognising there needs to be some monitoring of the performance of the organisation, such that earlier in the first year, work must start if needed, because their performance is not in line with our requirements.
Thank you. Thank you. Good points, David. Mark, and then Ron.
Well, I think beat my thunder. Actually, I agree with Suzanne and David here. I think it's agile. It's much better. It's 1+1 is the way we should be going. I think there is an option next year, coming back at this time next year or something, or slightly earlier, to make sure that the board is happy with that to note, and we can move forward. But I think that is leave a 1 year would cause mayhem and extra cutting, because we'd have to start sometime in January, I'm assuming, the officers, to actually start getting a procurement exercise to actually deliver that. That is not what we want to do over the next 12 months, when we've got a lot of work to do on a major new project coming, the Getting Building Fund and Tranche 2 coming through here as well. So there is a lot of work to come that's coming for the government's going to push onto this board very shortly. So I think 1+1 is the way to go.
Thank you, Mark. Ron. Keith, do you have your hand up, or is that just an old one? That's an old one. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Can we make a note of this? It seems like David, Mark, and I are going to in total agreement. So yeah, I think not only do we need certainty, but the company also needs certainty. And I agree with David and Mark. 1+1 is the best option on this.
Okay.
There is a circumstance where the planets do actually align, so that is not an unusual event that we might all agree on something.
Thank you, Simon. Did you want to say something?
We don't all live in Essex.
Only once in 1,000 years, though.
Yeah, not to disagree with anything that's already been said, and without wanting to prolong the debate any further, I just think we need to make sure that in 1 or 2 years' time, with a 6-year procurement contract, what we needed in 2016 is very different to what we might need now. So I think we just need to be alive to that, because the accountabilities then were very different to the accountabilities now, and the complications around the different funds and all. That's the three.
Yeah, very important point. Roger, were you raising your hand? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, I think that clearly I hear what the majority view is. I think so long as we will actually come back and have a meaningful discussion about this at the appropriate time next year, then I can live with that.
Thank you. And I think the officers have been given a series of challenges about the monitoring of the delivery of this consultancy. So thank you with that. So I'm just going to split it up and ask us to agree this now. Do we agree to call off the Bloom Consultancy Framework and award the ITE contract directly to Steer on a 1+1 basis? Can I see your hands if you agree?
Yeah, subject to.
Subject. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Roger, we had you smiling all the way through this. Don't change it.
Thank you. Now I'm going to hand back over to Suzanne, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a couple of items to update you on. These aren't items for decision. The first is some proposed updates to the assurance framework. So when SELEP Limited was incorporated, and we had many long conversations about governance, which I'm sure everybody remembers, so I won't go into them in any great depth here. And we got to the position where we have a framework agreement between effectively the authorities who make up the Accountability Board with SELEP Limited. One of the part within that framework agreement, there is a requirement for the assurance framework to be consulted with Accountability Board, but the actual adoption of the framework is the responsibility of Strategic Board. So today we're just consulting with you on the assurance framework changes. So effectively we've had to update the assurance framework because we had written the assurance framework on the basis of funding that we knew about. We hadn't really thought that we would get a mid-year funding stream that we would have to push through very quickly. So there was a lesson learned for us there. So we've updated the assurance framework to take into account that we now have GBF. And we've also tried to future-proof it for any other funding streams that might come out in very quick, at very quick pace in future. So we've made the items in there sort of fairly generic, so it will cover everything. All our funding has to be administered in line with the National Insurance Framework. So effectively what's there for LGF would be there for any other funding stream, but we've sort of made it a bit more generic and made sure that we've got governance mechanisms in future. So that was a lesson learned for us there. There's some other small changes where we've picked up the inevitable sort of typos and clarifications that always come up in a document of these sorts. So if I stop there and see if there's any questions about the assurance framework or any feedback that this group would like to give on the framework?
Thanks, Suzanne. You'll have seen a very detailed track changes document where you can see any changes that were made, but so does anybody have any queries, comments? No. Okay, Suzanne, if you can move on. Thank you.
Yep, that's lovely. Having had very long conversations about the assurance framework before, I'm really pleased that we're not going to have one today. The second point on the agenda is the risk register. So provided an update to board on the risk register. The risks that been reported previously, obviously still there around COVID, around workload. The risk around the not receiving the final third of funding has been removed because we have now received the final third of LGF funding, as Rhiannon updated earlier, and we do now have a major risk about the delivery of GBF, as we've discussed at length in the meeting. We haven't had the grant determination. We can't move forward on funding agreements because of that, which is a huge risk, as board members have already raised themselves today. We're mitigating these risks as best we can, and we'll continue to keep you updated on them. Was there any questions about the risk register?
Doesn't look like it. Obviously, you know, I'm concerned to see as many reds as we have on that risk register at the moment, and I would just like to thank the officers for their work on all of this, but also just to urge us all to, you know, as board members, to continue to keep an eye on these risks and facilitate where we can to help officers deal with these risks. So maybe there is something that Chris and I, as chair and deputy chairs of SELEP, could maybe talk to government or send a note to government asking them to urge them on the GBF funding, maybe perhaps we should do something like that in the next little while. Are there any questions? Roger, did I see that you wanted something, or was that an old one?
No, it's not an old one. I was indicating it goes back to when we talk on the assurance framework. Page 180 talks about the membership of federated boards and commitment to having at least 1/3 female membership. It says of appointed members of the federated boards, and it's not quite clear to me whether that embraces the local authority members who are there in their elected status or not, because that if it includes them, then there's potentially, and it's a bit of a challenge, because the elected members will be there for the reason of their being elected. That may or may not generate the balance that we're looking for, and therefore it would mean that the other members, the business members and so on, you would end up possibly having to compensate very heavily in the other direction. So I think it's a question as to whether we make clear that that shouldn't really include the elected or local authority members.
So the we include that in as an aim rather than a requirement. The requirement from government for LEP boards is actually that it applies to all boards. We've sort of made the argument back to them on a number of cases around democratic representation, and that being decided at the ballot box rather than anywhere else. But they took a very firm line with us of, you know, well, effectively, we don't really care. You still need to meet the requirements. And I guess so we have this in as an aim. It's not a requirement at federated boards. I guess the concern is that if we do not have the right diversity at our federated boards, we will never be able to achieve it at strategic board. And we know that we absolutely have to do that. So that is in there, and it sits across the entirety of the board, but it is an aim. It isn't, you know, we won't, it isn't an actual requirement of the federated boards, but I think we do need to try and move to that level of diversity across all members of the board.
No, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the aim, having appointed actually a 40% female cabinet myself. I'm more than up for that, but I think it's just a question of whether you end up with, as I say, unintended consequences if you're trying to. But if it's not actually a requirement, I get that. But yes, because the local authority members are not within, in a sense, the LEP's own remit. But you're saying that there's enough flexibility in this that it just remains an aspiration.
Yeah, it's just we need to have, you know, the diversity across the federated boards for us to then be able to pull, because the recruitment from the strategic board comes, so we will need a diverse population of federated board members to be able to meet our own requirements. And you know, Chris is very strong on having that very wide, and Sarah too, that really diverse board that we want. So
okay.
Thank you, Suzanne. I see Rodney and then Simon, I think.
I just want to on this little bit about the local representation, and those of us who were at those interminable meetings we had in London. This was the chestnut that came up at every meeting when we were discussing the new structure of the LEP and the creation of the limited company, that you could not dictate to local authorities that they had their representation had got to mirror that was required, because of the very reasons that were said. You can't direct to the electorate as to who they elect as the leader or the representative of their respective local authorities. And it's a conundrum that went on and on in that discussion, and I think we just left it at the end, although we did make representations, that we just have to live with it, and accept that if you're looking at the total makeup of the various boards, the representation wherever it comes from, has to be as directed. I think it's the third was for female representation, and that's as it is, but accepting the fact you cannot direct to local authorities because they are determined by the electorate as to exactly who their representatives will be.
Thank you, Rodney. Simon.
Well, you cursed it, Suzanne. You said you didn't want to debate about the assurance framework. So you cursed it, didn't you? Rodney remembers it, but yeah, I think we had a threat of money being withheld if we didn't reform our boards, didn't we, at the time? And I would say that even if this is one about nomenclature, maybe mostly, but it shouldn't be a requirement. It shouldn't be a must. It should be our ambition to have a diverse board, whether it's the SELEP board or our devolved boards, and that just needs to be an ambition despite the challenges that may provide.
Thank you, Simon. And from me personally, I really believe that diversity of thought can bring a lot to boards, and I really hope you'll see at the AGM we have some really interesting speakers at the next our AGM to help encourage us to think about these things. I know in ways that you do, but I absolutely understand all the challenges that you have just pointed out. But I'm very keen that we look at representing as much as possible the views of the many across our boards, and the views of some of our, this is taxpayers' money. So let's try and ensure we're as equal and as diverse as we possibly can be. So thank you very much for that. So unless there is any other questions, we just would need to note the proposed updates to the assurance framework and the updated assurance framework monitoring, and note the risk register at Appendix C. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for all your work on that. I'm sure that's joyous going through that line by line. Let's move now on to item 13. I'm going to hand over now to Lorna, which is an update on the latest financial position.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just as a reminder, so my name is Lorna Norris and I work for Essex County Council in the accountable body role. We monitor and oversee the financials for the LEP. A fairly short report for me today, reflecting the latest position for the board, which is on the financials, which is currently showing an online position in terms of comparison to budget, with no real significant risks being raised at this point. Just wanted to kind of highlight the couple of areas where there are still sort of ongoing concerns which reflect into the current year and into the future year position with regards to our dependency on external interest receipts, and the fact that obviously interest rates remain very low, and this is obviously one of the reasons why we had to recast the budget back in July. So that in itself still becomes an issue. At the moment, the forecast in that space hasn't been reflected to update any kind of receipt of the Getting Building Fund. So there is a potential opportunity that we could get additional receipts if and when we actually receive that funding from government, and depending on how much they allocate us. The sort of negative to that is that there's also an additional risk that interest rates may continue to drop. So we're working very closely with our Treasury Management colleagues in Essex to keep monitoring that position, and we'll provide further update when we come back to the board in November. I think the only other area to flag, which has come up a couple of times, is that sort of uncertainty with regards to when we're going to receive the Getting Building Fund, because obviously funding decisions are now reliant upon that, that funding and what the associated conditions will be on that funding, which will then afford us flexibilities or otherwise, depending on what those conditions are. So I would support the comments back around the board and from the chair with regards to kind of keeping pressure on government to try and get that assurance, because they had indicated that funding would come in August, and then we're now middle of September and with still no indication of when it's going to arrive. That's all from me for now, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Lorna. Are there any questions from people on the revenue budget? Ron, thank you.
It's not a question or anything, Sarah. I just think I'd like to put on record that what we get from our officers is excellent value, and the work that they do, and I really appreciate what they do for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Really important thing to note. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No. So I asked the board to note the current online forecast revenue outturn position for 2020-21. Thank you. Yep. Okay, so let's move now on to item 14, which is the SELEP Revenue Skills COVID-19 Recovery Programme, which was actually, as you know, debated with great interest at the last SELEP board meeting. And I want to pay tribute also to Louise. Thank you very much for all the work you continue to do on this, but I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, I'm conscious of time. So you've obviously got the paper in your packs, but just to run through this, having received the strategic board approval for the focus, process and criteria of the £2 million Skills COVID Recovery Fund, we're seeking accountability board approval for the procurement approach and delegated authority. So just to recap, this is repurposed Growing Places funding, and it sits alongside the £2.4 million Business Support COVID Recovery Fund. The strategic board this month agreed that this should focus on a pathway to jobs approach, digital skills for all, and innovative solution to skills barriers to tackle the barriers that we're currently experiencing. So we've been presented with options by the procurement team in the accountable body, which are set out in your paper. And we're recommending option 2 as set out. So that would be a training framework for the delivery of 1,545,000 with individual lots within that framework, which will enable separate approaches and programmes, and also a £375,000 consultancy framework to cover the innovative solutions to training barriers aspect. We've also included £80,000, and just to clarify, 35,000 of that is to be shared with the business support pot for project management, procurement and legal costs, and 45,000 of that is a contingency pot to lever in potential additional government funding for areas such as the Digital Skills Partnership, further to conversations we've had with government departments, and which would obviously be redeployed to the bigger pot if it doesn't end up being utilised. So this option 2 enables us to get procurements out in a timely manner, responding to the board's feedback that work needs to get underway as soon as possible. It also means that we can have different programmes of work carried out under the proposed framework. In order to respond quickly, we've also recommended delegated authority to the SELEP Chief Executive to sign funding off and to amend values of up to 100,000. As set out in the paper, the process includes evaluation panels to include officers from local authorities where there is no conflict of interest. And the timescales set out are kind of quite tight, so they may move by a couple of weeks, but it's an absolute priority for us to get procurements out in October, which is why we've gone for option 2, and with a quick evaluation and award turnaround, because we know that there's a big urgency here with end of furloughing and that kind of thing. So that concludes my update. Open to any questions.
Thank you, Louise. Do I have questions from anybody or comments? Nope. Nope. So, okay, so we are asked to agree.
I whacked my hand up, Sarah, at the end there. Sorry.
Sorry,
Sarah,
Louise.
I hand up at the end there. Sorry, Chair.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm biased, aren't I? I'm going to support the Skills Fund anyway, but I think what we just need to be alive to a bit further down the road is that actually this has been debated and discussed quite a bit already. And one thing we do know is that the economy is flexing and changing as times are changing. So what we knew a month ago is very different now. And I think we just need to be alive to the fact that we may well need to prepare ourselves for the Skills Fund to flex later on down the road as a result of the way the economy is changing. So I think that's just a point I wanted to make in here, and for us to look at that further down the road. And I know the board will debate that as and when future funds come up, but 2 million will either sit around for a while and not get spent, but the likelihood is it will probably get spent very, very quickly actually, and we'll need more.
Thank you, Simon. Absolutely, and I think that point was very loudly made and well made at the last SELEP board meeting So thank you. Roger, did you? Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, just say in terms of the local local authority individuals who'd sit on the evaluation panel, when would we know who those are, or how would the accountability board be made aware of that?
At the moment, we're proposing that they would be the officers that sit on the skills working group, the SELEP skills working group. So for Kent, that would be Alan Bailey and Daniel Ratcliffe, but we could share those with local authorities to double check we've got the appropriate person from your.
That would be helpful, thank you.
No problem.
Simon.
Sorry, I think thinking about that, actually, when Roger's just said it, I would strongly urge us to consider ED, economic development officers, because actually what we need in education will often come from education officers. What we need for the economy is what Skills Fund's all about, and I think ED officers are probably better placed to determine what might be an economic priority as it's moving and flexing so quickly. They're closer to it.
Okay.
Thank you, Louise. You'll be able to take that on board and look at that. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other comments? No. So we are being asked to agree the award of 2 million to the programme based on the case for investment set out in section 4. Do I have your agreement? Thank you. We are being asked to agree the proposed procurement approach for the delivery of 1.545 million through a new training framework, which can be delivered into separate lots. Is that agreed? Thank you. Agree to procure for the delivery of 375,000 consultancy services covering innovative approaches to skills barriers, with authority delegated to the SELEP Chief Executive Officer to determine the procurement route. Is that agreed? Thank you. To agree £80,000 of the £2 million funding pot to be used for project management, legal, procurement and contingency costs. Agreed. To agree to delegate authority to the SELEP Chief Executive Officer to sign off the award of grant funding and all contracts for the specific interventions included in the programme. Is that agreed? Thank you. And to agree delegated authority to the SELEP Chief Executive Officer to amend the value of funding identified to each programme by up to 100,000 if so required, subject to the total value of investment remains within the total £2 million budget allocated to the programme, minimum project benefits set out in Table 1 still being achieved, and ensuring the maximum value of any of the projects included in the programme does not exceed 1 million. Is that agreed? Thank you. And obviously to note, the procurement of the projects included within the programme will be completed in accordance with the Essex County Council procurement advice and regulations. Thank you. Thank you very much, Louise, for all that work. And as Simon said, essential work that we get out there and are very proactive in this ever-changing world. So thank you very much. So what's left is the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled for Friday, the 16th of October 2020 from 10 o'clock till 12 o'clock. And I just want to pay particular tribute to Rhiannon, who is going to be calling in from her holiday in order to be able to do this. So thank you very much, Rhiannon. Is there any urgent business? There's none that I'm aware of. Rhiannon, have I missed?
Yeah, sorry, do you mind if I just come in? There were just 2 points of governance that we just missed slightly at the beginning because of connection issues. That's okay. Today we did have apologies from Councillor Gledhill. So Mark Coxall was here representing Thurrock Council. I'm sure you all gathered that by the end of the meeting. And the other point is also it's helpful to have the steer from the higher education and further education representatives today, but just to note, we'll be just counting the formal votes of the local authority members as part of the decision making. I think that's fine in all the decisions we made today. We'll core it, but just to make that point.
Thank you.
I think that was it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. confidential appendices we've covered elsewhere, so we don't need to say anything on that. And I don't believe that there is any urgent exempt business at all. So with 4 minutes to spare, thank you very much to you all. Always good to have all your thoughts and contributions, and thanks to the officers once more. Very good to see you. I'll see you again on the 16th of October, if not, well, I'll see you hopefully before at the next SELEP board meeting and the AGM. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.